Hello, Calvin Watkins of the Dallas Morning News, and welcome to our post-draft Zoom War Room edition. I'm joined by the great David Moore. He's covered the Cowboys for about 2 weeks. Hey, David, how are you?
Great, Calvin. You?
I'm fantastic. Jordan Reid has joined us before. He is back. He works for the Draft Network. Does a fantastic job analyzing all the picks and evaluating the talent before they become professionals. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
No problem. It's a pleasure being here.
That jersey off to your right, is that from Chicago Bears? Where's that from? Atlanta, where's that come from?
That's actually my jersey from my playing days.
Jordan was a big-time quarterback.
Yeah.
Many moons ago.
long time ago.
I want to start with Jordan about just assessing this draft for the Cowboys. And what did you think of what they did? Obviously, they didn't really reach in the first round. They got CeeDee Lamb, and they look like they got a lot of quality players. Just your thoughts on what they did in the draft overall.
I mean, arguably, I think this is one of my favorite draft classes just because of the value that they got. And it wasn't just CeeDee Lamb in the first round. I thought the 2 picks following that, I thought it was terrific value as well. Get Trayvon Diggs at 51 overall. I thought that was a terrific spot for him. And then getting Neville Gallimore, 82 overall. I had him ranked as a top 50 prospect. So I think the value that they got overall, and even the later guy, Tyler Biadasz, and also Bradley Anae. So what you notice about all these Cowboy picks is that they went much later than what a lot of people were expecting, even in the first round with CeeDee Lamb. I think the Cowboys had some other guys in mind at 17, but CeeDee Lamb was sitting there, and there's no way they could pass him up. And I would even go as far as they probably wouldn't have paid Amari Cooper $100 million if they thought CeeDee Lamb was going to be sitting there in their laps. I think there's a strong argument could be made about that. So I think Will McClay and Jerry Jones and everybody in the draft room was really excited to see him at that spot. And it was just an example of just taking the best player available as opposed to reaching for a need.
Yeah, and piggybacking off that, David, you've covered the team a long time. We've seen them reach for players at times. And here they stuck to the board. Were you surprised by that?
Well, I think really in recent years, it strikes me Baltimore's always done a good job year in and year out of kind of just sticking in their spot. And every year you look up at the end of the draft and you go, well, Baltimore did a really good job too. I thought this was a lot of the same. And now you go back and you look at it here. And I know Jerry Jones has this reputation as a wheeler dealer, and it's in his DNA that you're going to make trades. But, this is the 8th consecutive year that the Cowboys did not make a trade on the clock in the first round. And if you go back to 2014, the Cowboys have made 9 trades since 2014 during the draft, from 2015 on.
Okay.
None of them have come in the first 3 rounds. They've all been from the 4th round down. So I think what you're seeing is Will McClay and Stephen Jones have kind of implemented or put a foundation in place, especially in the first 3 rounds, where it's like, look, certainly we're going to move in the draft if it makes sense. But
right.
You know what? We trust our board. We trust what these guys say. We've vetted all of these grades. We've built a consensus. So why are we going to move around in these the first 2 days of the draft? There are enough players there we're confident we can get. Now, I think they really tested it with Stephon Diggs because, as they said, their models showed only a 1% chance that he would be there at number 51. And if they would have moved back in the first round, he was a guy they were considering to take in the first round as well. But, yeah, I think Jordan hit on as well. I think, from what we were told, they thought they were hoping their scenario would be that they would be sitting at 17 and they would be on the clock discussing whether to take A.J. Terrell, the corner out of Clemson, or Clavion Chason, the edge rusher out of LSU. In their best world, they thought that was what was going to happen, that they would have a choice between those two. And I hear they had them both pretty close, so it was basically a toss-up. But when Terrell goes to Atlanta and then suddenly CeeDee Lamb is there unexpectedly, the gap of talent between CeeDee Lamb and everyone else they had on the board at that point was just too great to ignore.
I want to ask you both this question, staying with CeeDee Lamb. Do you think he fell in not in a negative way, but just because of how things went. Because 3 quarterbacks went, there were a lot of offensive linemen that needed to go. So is this maybe, in a sense, when you look back on it, maybe he didn't fall in a negative way. He just fell because of what everyone else did. I don't know, Jordan, what you thought about that.
I don't think he necessarily fell. I think he was just a person that fell as the result of, some teams that maybe needed a receiver, but they just opted to go a different direction. And the San Francisco 49ers are a prime example of that. A lot of people thought they maybe were going to take a receiver, but they end up taking Javon Kinlaw. And then 11 to 25 was really thought to be the sweet spot for receivers, just because starting off with the Las Vegas Raiders, I still got to get used to saying that. They ended up taking Henry Ruggs III. And then after that, you get into teams like the Philadelphia Eagles, who were at 21, and the Minnesota Vikings at 22. So 11 to 25 was really seen as the sweet spot. But, I think it was a wide consensus that CeeDee Lamb was the top receiver on most teams' board. And we don't specifically know that just because the Raiders proved all of us wrong, just because Ruggs was obviously the top guy on their board. But with Lamb, he just brought some special things to the table that some of these other receivers didn't necessarily bring. So it seemed to be a common consensus that Lamb was going to be the first off the board. And then I think, like I said, Will McClay, he couldn't turn the card in as quickly as he could just because he was so excited that Lamb was there.
I remember Stephen Jones was saying, David, that when Ruggs went to Vegas, that this became more of a reality for him when he said we might get CeeDee Lamb,
Well, I think they felt, I agree, Kinlaw going to San Francisco. I think everyone felt that a good chance Lamb was going to go there. And then when the Raiders went Ruggs, and my understanding was they had CeeDee Lamb ahead of Ruggs until the combine when Ruggs ran the 4.2 or whatever. And I was like, well, okay, now let's really – and look at the division they're in, who they have to go up against. I think they felt the need for speed, to match up with Kansas City and the other teams in the division. So once Ruggs went to Vegas, that's where Stephen Jones and I think Mike McCarthy both went, wow, maybe now Lamb can get down to us.
Right.
But clearly, as the Cowboys said, they went through multiple mock drafts. None of them had CeeDee Lamb, a decision at 17. And you look at who they did their virtual interviews with. They didn't have a virtual interview with Lamb. They didn't have a virtual interview with Judy because their belief was both were going to be gone. They did have a virtual interview with Ruggs. So they thought Ruggs was the most likely of those top 3 receivers to be there at 17. When he was the first to go, then they started thinking, can this happen?
Let's talk about the middle rounds, starting with 2 through, 5. And Jordan, getting a corner from Alabama, that's like another first-round pick. Got probably an instant starter there. Just your thoughts on how Dallas handled the middle part of the draft last week.
Once again, it goes back to the word value. And they got so many good players at certain spots that a lot of experts were saying they probably wouldn't be there. And Trayvon Diggs was one guy that opinions were all over the map about him, just because there were some people that had him as a late first-round guy, and there are some people that had him as low as a late second-round guy. He ends up going right in the median of that. So I think when you lose a top key player like Byron Jones, you have to figure out a way to fill that void, just because the Cowboys didn't do that via free agency. They didn't address corner, not to my mind that I can think of right now. So they needed somebody at that cornerback position, and I think Trayvon Diggs is a guy that can bring something to the table right away as a starter. And we know this secondary needs help all over the field, just because they were one of the worst in the league last year as far as pass defense standpoint. So they needed somebody in that secondary, and we know the Cowboys covet length at that position. And even though Chris Richard isn't there anymore, we still know they like some long guys at that cornerback position. And I think Trayvon Diggs definitely brings that to the table. So I think the most interesting pick that I'm most excited about, honestly, is the center position with Tyler Piadas. Just because with Travis Frederick gone now, they don't have a clear heir apparent there at the center position. And I know they took a couple guys last year in the mid-rounds, but they don't have a clear guy right away. And I think Tyler Biadasz definitely can bring that to the forefront, a guy that is very mature, started all 3 years, over 40 games at Wisconsin, but injuries is just the thing that's really derailed his stock. But coming into the year, he was seen as an early second-round pick last year, but he had some injuries. He got banged up quite a bit during his time, even though he didn't miss a start at Wisconsin. But his medicals weren't very good, and that was one of the biggest reasons why he slipped to the 5th round. But as far as talent, I think he's a day one starter.
David, we talked about Reggie Robinson being the corner from Tulsa being drafted, and Jerry Jones had alluded to him possibly moving to safety because he's that big, long, lean kid. He did play a little bit of safety in high school. I think he played a little bit of safety at Tulsa his redshirt freshman year. What's your thoughts about, Diggs obviously is the true corner, but moving Robinson possibly to safety and maybe what that can open up for the Cowboys defensively?
Yeah, I think, again, you never judge a draft class by what it does in its rookie season. You have to project it beyond that. But I will say for this class to have the impact it needs to have, I think Diggs has to step in as a day one starter because you can make the argument right now that he's their best corner on this roster already.
Better than Cheeto? So, I'm shocked.
Yeah. Well, again, you brought up Robinson. I think that's what's going to play out at training camp whenever that gets underway. I think Chidobe Awuzie is, because of his size and his build and what he did in college, they could see him playing some safety. You could also see Robinson, their fourth-round pick, playing some safety. Now, the question I have is when you have a rookie who's not going to be able to take advantage of the offseason program to kind of get his feet on the ground, and you're just throwing everything at him when training camp starts, is that going to make it more difficult to say, okay, let's work you at corner and safety to see what you can do? I think certainly long-term he has that ability, but I don't know that they're going to want to throw too much at him early. And I think it's look, there's a little bit more for him to develop, but they're fascinated by Robinson. They're really intrigued by his potential. And, right now, looking at how this team is composed, you would say he's the fifth corner and a guy who really helps you on special teams. So whenever you get in that position, blocked 4 kicks in college. So that's certainly something that they expect him to be a key contributor on special teams this coming year. But, a fifth corner gets work in this league with all of the packages that you see. And so my belief is because of the lack of an offseason program, they might be more inclined to say, okay, if either a Woozy or a Robinson can be used at safety, who do we want to do it with? And I think Cheeto's the more likely because he's been here, he's been in the league for a while. And, that being said, right now your 2 starting corners based on talent and productivity are going to be Trayvon Diggs and Chidobe Awuzie. So do you want to take Awuzie out of that to work him at safety? And then in that scenario, who is the other starter? Is it going to be Jordan Lewis? Is it going to be Anthony Brown, who was exposed when he was a starter a few years ago? You wouldn't expect it would be Robinson. So that's a long-winded way of saying I can see him playing safety down the road, but I don't know that it'll be this season how much they'll use him there.
Yeah, there's a lot to maneuver in the secondary, and even in free agency when the Cowboys are still making moves in free agency. Of all those players, they've signed the biggest name I think they got was HaHa Clinton-Dix at safety, and he got a 1-year deal. So a lot of these guys might not even be here in 2021. So there's so many unanswered questions about the secondary. We are joined now by the outstanding Michael Gehlken. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Calvin. How are you? How's everyone?
We're good. We've just been talking post-draft, and I had asked Jordan and David about the assessments of the draft. And after you've had a chance to sleep on it, had a few cocktails, just, read all the books, your thoughts on what the Cowboys did over the 3 days last weekend, Mike? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if they could have drawn it up much better in terms of players available at their assigned slots. We saw them trade up to get somebody only once, and they sacrificed future draft capital in doing so. And big thing is they project to have 4 compensatory picks in 2021. So they don't mind parting with the 2021 fifth-round pick to trade up for that Wisconsin center. So overall, I thought they did a really great job of adding a couple cornerbacks where the future, as you said, is so uncertain. Wide receiver, where after the 2021 season, the future is very uncertain with no guaranteed money due to Amari Cooper. You have Michael Gallup as an unrestricted free agent. You kind of go down the list. One thing I do after every draft is kind of call around the league and kind of get a sense of, is this draft, what are your thoughts of it? Because it's one thing to know how the media views it, and we don't have all the information. But it's quite another to know how another NFL team views the draft class because they know the medicals. They know why a guy like Zach Bond fell the way he did when many people expected him to be like a late first, early second round. And the feedback I got was, wow, yeah, CeeDee Lamb, number 1 wide receiver. Trevon Diggs, we actually had him as a number 2 cornerback on our board ahead of C.J. Henderson with number 9 overall. Cowboys got him at number 51. That same team told me that Neville Gallimore, the team's 3rd round selection, was an early second round type of pick for them. So, again, that's just one team, but it supports the value that the Cowboys feel they got in this draft class.
I'm going to ask Jordan this. There were 2 positions that I thought the Cowboys might have, taken care of, a safety, but obviously Reggie Robinson could probably move to safety. They didn't draft a tight end. I don't know if the tight end class was kind of weak this year. So I asked Jordan about tight ends and safeties in the draft. Was it that weak that you didn't want to reach for one of those guys in the 5th or 6th rounds?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing about this whole ordeal with the tight ends is that the players we projected late went early, and then the players we projected early went late or undrafted. So I think that was an interesting phenomenon of how everything turned out. But with the Cowboys, I mean, they're so loaded on the perimeter, or maybe they didn't feel the need to address tight end right away, and they didn't at all. So I think they're loaded at receiver with, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, and then Michael Gallup, who I think is a very underrated player in their wide receiver core. So maybe they didn't feel the need to utilize the tight end or get one right away just because they're so loaded at those top 3 guys. And then as far as safety, I was kind of surprised that they didn't bring anybody in. But, I mean, there's been some talk that Trevon Diggs may be a better free safety. There's been some scouts that have actually said that about him, that teams saw him as a free safety as opposed to a corner. And then Reggie Robinson is another guy that could make the transition to the back end of the defense at safety as well. So it'll just be interesting to see exactly where they play either one of those guys, and maybe they see either one of those as a safety to solve some of their issues there.
Michael, does anything worry you when you look at this draft class for the Cowboys? Or are you like, oh, man, I don't know about this kid? Does anything worry you? I mean, as much praise as we've given it, there's got to be some concerns, or no?
Well, I think what are you expecting out of a day 3 pick at center? Are you him to compete and be your week 1 starter? If that's your expectation, and I doubt that would be the case for the Cowboys, but if that was your expectation, that would concern me. I think we all should realign our immediate expectations for any rookie, given that they're all missing the entirety of a spring workout program, which is extremely beneficial just to kind of get up to speed before the physicality picks up in training camp. And so I think that is something that comes to mind. But no, I wouldn't really say for me that there is anything too concerning. Jordan mentioned the tight end position. I do think that is interesting, given that you look at what the Cowboys were out of 12 personnel last year. They had Blake Jarwin. They had Jason Witten. To be this year with Blake Jarwin and Blake Bell, I think we could agree that that is a downgrade, and that the Cowboys personnel, while better from 11 when they're at 3 wide receiver sets, CeeDee Lamb is an upgrade over Randall Cobb, and Michael Gallup's a year later in this league going into his 3rd NFL season. 11 personnel, I think they're going to be a lot better this year, but 12 personnel, I would argue that the Cowboys are worse following this draft.
David, any worries for you after the weekend?
No worries, but like you said, I mean, we've gone through and we've talked about how almost all of these picks in the first 6 rounds were ahead of value of where they were actually, taken. Maybe Robinson was the closest to being right in that range, but all the other picks in the first 6, and I would say, Bradley and I is intriguing because most people felt he would be taken higher. Maybe certainly 1 round higher, maybe even slipping into the end of the 3rd round in some projections you saw. And so there's a sense of, wow, they got a 9 in the 5th round. This guy can really help them in the pass rush. But I would just go back through the years and say how many players taken in the 5th round help your pass rush, and how many blossom into double-digit sack guys. And it doesn't happen too often. So I think a guy with an eye, I would just – again, it's not a concern. I'm not troubled by it. But I would just point out that – he was taken in the 5th round, and it's the rare player that comes edge rusher who's taken that late in the draft, who turns out to be a double-digit sack guy. And I think that there's probably some expectation on some level that, wow, this guy can do that. Now, if it happens, then the Cowboys knock this draft out of the park. If you're getting a 5th round pick, who's going to be that level of a pass rusher. But there's a reason he lasted to the 5th, because he's a little undersized and he's slow. Now, does he fit in a 4-3? Is he more of a 3-4 guy? They've made it very clear they're going to adapt their system to what the player can do, and it's incumbent on them to find a niche for him to be successful. But to me, he's interesting because I don't know how much he'll be able to really contribute this first year. But I think certainly fan expectations are, oh, wow, this guy should step in and really do something.
Obviously, we talked about safety, talked about tight end. Jordan used to play quarterback 100 years ago. Cowboys did take a quarterback with their last pick. How do you evaluate that position that late in the draft? Or is it about Mike McCarthy, like, I'm getting one of my boys from Pittsburgh? Is that what that was? Or can this guy actually be a little bit more than a camp body? But he is a 7th round pick. And he did play at the University of Pittsburgh, which is, Division I school, whatever. But is he just a camp body, or one of McCarthy's boys who's going to be their future QB coach, or can he be something?
I think all of that really factors into the equation, just because with football, it's all about relationships and who you know. And I'm sure he had plenty of the intel on the quarterback that they did select. I think his name was Ben DiNucci. So
Ben DiNucci, yes.
From James Madison. So I'm sure he had plenty of intel on exactly just his whereabouts and everything, that how he operates from a day-to-day basis. But like we talked about on the last podcast, is that these guys are like late round. They're like lottery tickets. And sometimes you can't win a lottery if you don't buy a ticket. And I think just getting a guy like this, we know he's not going to come in and be the starter, really expected to be a contributor or anything like that. But if Dak Prescott gets hurt, Lord willing, he doesn't. But if he comes in and just lights the world up like Gardner Minshew or something like that, at worst, you have somebody that you can ship off for maybe a mid to late round selection. That's why I say these guys are just like lottery tickets. And like I said, if I was a GM, I would take a quarterback every 2 years, just because if you get that decision right, you're saving a lot of people's jobs, and you're really saving your job as well. It happened with the Cowboys with the Tony Romo situation, when they took a chance on Dak Prescott, and everybody knows the worst kept secret was that they were trying to trade up for Paxton Lynch. Obviously, that didn't work out for them, and they ended up with Dak Prescott. So if it were me, I would take one of these guys every 2 years, just because sometimes you can cash in on those lottery tickets, and we don't know what DiNucci is going to make out. He might not make it out of rookie minicamp if they do end up having him, but it's just a matter of taking a chance on one of those guys.
Michael, you had a little intel on a couple of quarterbacks that I think Dallas was interested in coming into the draft. Tell us about that. Michael, I think you're on mute.
I had a noisy puppy. I was trying to not interrupt Jordan.
That's okay. Raina's okay. She can bark. That's okay.
Golly, I'm trying to think of the name of the Florida international quarterback from Ashwaubenon, Wisconsin. You remember the name better than I do.
Montgomery?
James
Morgan.
James
Morgan.
Montgomery,
Yeah, that's
yes.
right. He was someone in whom the Cowboys expressed a lot of interest throughout the draft process. So Mike McCarthy was high on. But I think the key thing that they set out going into this draft was, do they want a quarterback on day 3? Absolutely. But they also wanted value. And so they weren't going to ignore their draft board to get a quarterback in the 4th round for the sake of getting one, or in the 5th round. They took a look at their board, understood where their roster needs are today, and prioritized those needs ahead of a project that they nonetheless commit themselves to with DiNucci. So, what maybe it was a plan all along in terms of DiNucci, but it did seem like signability was a factor. That often is what rules the day in the 7th round is, okay, we have a number of our players who are on the board. Let's see which guys we can negotiate undrafted rookie deals with here in the 6th, 7th rounds. And then if we feel confident that we can land them after the draft, let's not sign them and sign some, let's not draft that person and draft someone in the 7th that we feel less confident we'd be able to sign as a free agent. So those are some of the dynamics that happen toward the end of the draft, which isn't to diminish what the team feels about DiNucci. He clearly was the quarterback they had in mind there as the draft process wore on.
Well, I think Dallas had an outstanding draft. I gave him a grade for B. A is just too high because you don't know if any of these kids could play. We believe they could play, but you don't know until you get them on the field. So that's why I gave him a B. I think David Michael gave him A's. But before we go, Jordan, just briefly tell us your final thoughts on this draft class. It sounds like it was an outstanding draft class, one of the best draft classes in a while, maybe since when they had the Zeke Dak draft class.
Yeah, I definitely think I think it's one of the better ones. I think it's definitely in the top 5 of any across the league. And I keep coming back to the word value. I think Will McClay and Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones hit it out the park. But of course, it's just on paper. We have to temper our expectations a little bit just because you never know how some of these guys are going to turn out, just because you don't know how they're going to play once they get on the field, just because psychologically, mentally, and then physically, the game is just a bit different for everybody. But as far as just projecting their translation to the league, I think they hit it out the park. And that's from pick 1 all the way through round 7, even with the late round quarterback in DiNucci. I'm always a fan of whenever teams take chances on late round guys, and I think the value where it comes into play with guys like Tyler Biadasz, who I think could be a day 1 starter for Travis Frederick at center, and then Bradley and we know that they can't really count on guys like Alden Smith, and even if Randy Gregory does come back. So Bradley and he might end up playing a big role for this team as a depth piece, and we know on that Utah defense, he was a key contributor for them, and we know he can be a pass rush prowess right away. So I love the CeeDee Lamb pick. Him and Amari Cooper and Gallup, that's going to be a very strong top 3 for Dak Prescott, and I think that offense is going to be very good. I'm excited to see how Mike McCarthy does incorporate all these pieces into the equation, and then of course with this secondary, we're going to see how things unfold in training camp. God willing, we do have a training camp this year, but we'll see what does happen as far as how they address the secondary situation at safety, and then at corner as well. I think Reggie Robinson was terrific value, and also Trayvon Diggs as well.
David, your thoughts? I think you gave him an A in the Dallas Morning News paper. We still printing, so that's good. So your final thoughts on this draft class from Dallas?
Yeah, A-. And again, everyone does this just based on at the moment, and if you want to get a good laugh, just go back and look at grades people gave classes 2-3 years ago compared to what those classes are doing now across the board, everyone, but I will say what impressed me was I think we can only go on what we know at the moment. And I think this was arguably their best class under Jerry Jones from the standpoint of they did it from the 17 spot in the first round. You mentioned the Elliott and Dak Prescott. Well, they were in the top 5 of each round that year. You go back when, I think Jerry and Steven pointed to the draft back in earlier, in this century, in the early 2000s when they had Ware and Spears.
Right.
Well, those are 2 first-round picks. This is a team that only moved up out of the 5th into the bottom of the 4th, and otherwise stayed true to the middle of every round. And to get all of those players, to me, to have the sort of draft they were able to execute, maybe you can do that if you're sitting at the top of each round when you're a top 5 pick, maybe a top 8 pick. But to do it from the 17 spot, I think is very, very rare. And they were able to do that to this point.
Michael, and you wrote a good story about the value of having that compensatory pick, of how you use that to as an extra pick to move up, to get to center. Your final thoughts on just what Dallas did. Obviously, David talked about the trade that they made to get to center. Just your final thoughts on how Dallas did last weekend in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I think without the luxury of hindsight, because if we really wanted to be fair with our grades, every single grade every year is TBD. You just don't know.
Do we want to be fair?
But we don't want to be fair. It's funny, as I've thought about this draft more, you can't help but think about if CeeDee Lamb being available at number 17, the seemingly impossible scenario, had not shown up, what does this Cowboys draft class look like? What is the conversation today? What grades are people like us putting on this thing? If things went to a little bit more toward expectation, it's probably AJ Terrell, maybe Caleb Chason, and then if it was Terrell there in the first round, obviously you're not going Diggs in the second. I mean, everything just had a totally different feel, and it all just started up top with how Lamb fell. And so I think it's interesting. there's a matter of luck that goes to the draft. And right now it seems like the Cowboys were lucky, but we'll never know exactly, or maybe I guess over the course of time, what that other scenario would have looked like. If things went a bit more expected, how that would have turned out. And that's just kind of, that reflects the random nature of life, or the random nature of the NFL draft. It's that alternative world that, the Cowboys were dealt here, and it sure seems to have served them well here today without that opportunity of hindsight quite yet.
Well, guys, I appreciate your time over the last couple of weeks. Jordan, I know you're a busy man. Thank you. David and Michael, they're not doing nothing.
We're not busy.
You're not busy at all. But I appreciate you guys for joining us for the last couple of weeks on our Zoom draft chats. And hopefully we'll talk again next spring when it comes time to break down the draft. Who knows where the Cowboys might be drafted. Maybe they'll go 0-16 and they'll have the number 1 overall pick. That'd be exciting. I think it would be. You guys are such haters. But anyway, for Michael Gehlken, David Moore, Jordan Reid, I'm Calvin Watkins for the Dallas Morning News. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.